Es un verdadero peligro, una mentira. Nosotros queremos la verdad.
That is Marianne Aya Omak, who is performing there, and she has performed at a handful of POSTHOC salons in London and in New York and in San Francisco, and was found by Joan Baez, with whom she was on tour. Anyway, thank you so much for joining today at a POSTHOC live salon. The topic is sugar and how many different ways it's going to kill you, a rather dramatic title. And the guest today, the sugar nemesis, is Dr. Robert Lustig. His proper full quickie bio is he was professor of pediatric endocrinology at UCSF, and he is now chairman of the Institute of Responsible Nutrition. And when we do these salons in person, I always like to start off with a quote about the person to whom I'm going to be throwing out some questions. So here is a recent quote from Rob that I thought I would share with you, and this was in the press, so you can find this as well. I've heard COVID-19 referred to as a beast because it doesn't distinguish. In point of fact, it doesn't distinguish who it infects, but it does distinguish who it kills. Other than the elderly, it's those who are Black, obese, and or have pre-existing conditions. What distinguished these three demographics? Ultra-processed food, because ultra-processed food sets you up for inflammation, which COVID-19 is what distinguished these three demographics? Ultra-processed food, because ultra-processed food sets you up for inflammation, which COVID-19 is happy to exploit. Just another way processed food kills. Time to rethink your menu. So thank you for joining, Rob. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I want your playlist.
Marianne is fantastic. She is a fantastic musician, and we are always so lucky to have her perform. So I'm just going to throw this first question out for you. Is poor diet the primary factor that's driving COVID?
Well, no, I can't say that poor diet is, created COVID-19. That would be a little too over the top.
Yeah.
The point is that people think that it's, the virus kills you. No, actually, it's the cytokine storm that kills you. The virus, it sets you up for that cytokine storm. No argument there. Some people survive that, some people don't. The people who haven't survived it are those people who are already in a pro-inflammatory state.
Okay.
So we know African-American, obese, and now people with type 2 diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, hypertension, all of whom have chronic metabolic disease belying their manifestations. These are really symptoms of a pro-inflammatory state. The question is, what caused that pro-inflammatory state? And that's where food comes in.
Do you have any stats right now around COVID in terms of obesity and other metabolic syndromes such as type 2 diabetes?
So of the people who died in Detroit, that data just came out.
Okay.
It was extremely limited to those who were obese and had type 2 diabetes, something on the order of a 13.7% death rate for those who had those diseases versus those who did not, which was like in the 1% death rate. So these, this pro-inflammatory state puts you at greater risk. And the question is, why? And there are possibly three reasons, all having to do with food. The first is COVID-19 uses a portal that is attached to each cell as its method for entry, its injection point, if you will. Imagine it's like a mosquito and it, puts its stinger, right into this portal. And the portal is called ACE2, angiotensin converting enzyme 2. It's an endocrine receptor that I deal with. It's part of the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system, which I, as an endocrinologist, deal with. And the more ACE2s, the more infectivity and the more rapid.
Is it like a magnet for getting infected? Is it like so that the virus can hone in on it?
It's more like open doors.
Okay. Right.
More open doors. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. You know, like the difference between having an open window and a screened window if you're trying to prevent malaria.
Free for entry.
Right. And it turns out insulin is one of the drivers of that ACE2. So the higher your insulin, the more insulin resistant you are, the more ACE2 molecules you have, and therefore the more infectivity, therefore the greater the cytokine storm. So that's one reason.
Okay.
Second reason has to do with processed food and the lack of fiber. So soluble fiber in your food, which is real food, in the colon gets converted to a compound called butyric acid or butyrate. And that is an anti-inflammatory. And that has been shown to knock down the COVID-19 response in your body and keep the cytokine storm at bay. Well, you have to make that butyrate from soluble fiber, but if you're eating processed food, you're not getting it. So that's another reason why processed food is a problem. And then the third has to do with diabetes itself. It has now been shown that the higher your blood glucose, if you have diabetes, the more glycosylated that COVID-19 is, which makes it harder for the body to clear. So again, another reason why food indirectly through its effects on diabetes will drive the cytokine storm and make it more likely that you will succumb.
Can we take a step back a little bit? I think it was in 2009 that you posted a video on YouTube, or a UCSF video that went bananas and
still going bananas.
It's still going bananas. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure it is.
10.3 million now. It's called Sugar and the Bitter Truth.
Wow.
In 2009, I didn't think my mother would watch it. 10.3 million people watched a 90-minute treatise on carbohydrates.
And not one of those super slick videos either, for everyone who's trying to like market slick videos on YouTube. It was not one of those. I mean, it was very much sort of a university video. But so it went viral and it's been viewed how many times? 10 million times, you said?
I like that.
Something, yeah. I think it was 7 last time I saw you. So that's a while ago. That was 11 years ago. What has changed then? Do we still have as much of a sweet tooth in America?
We have a bigger sweet tooth, and nothing's changed. That's
nothing has changed. Okay.
Really, nothing has changed. I mean,
any stats on obesity?
There's one thing that has changed, and actually, the food industry documented it. So every year they do an analysis of people's preferences and their thought patterns regarding food. In 2011, only 11% of respondents thought that sugar or refined carbohydrate were different from other calories. Today, 33% of the population.
What's the difference? Who's educating them? Are they?
Me.
Okay.
So in essence, the sugar industry has documented, my efficacy, or our efficacy, I should say, the entire scientific community's efficacy in educating the public as to what the real problem is. Unfortunately, it hasn't made much of a difference in terms of food patterns, consumption, or policy in Washington. So
okay, I want to get to policy. I'm super interested in getting to policy as we continue to talk. Why is it that when we have something that's sugary, or when I'm low energy and I scoff a bunch of purple and red Skittles, why is it that which I do, why is it that I'm not really sated? What is the sugar doing to me that, a bowl of all brands not doing?
So first of all, sugar, remember, is 2 molecules. It's glucose and fructose.
Okay.
Glucose
is the more simple sugar, I guess.
Right.
Okay.
Well, sucrose, or table sugar, is the combination of these 2 molecules bound together. High fructose corn syrup is those same 2 molecules, just free. That's the big difference.
Okay.
All right. In any case, if you're consuming something sweet, it's a combination of glucose and fructose. Now, glucose suppresses ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hunger hormone.
What is it called?
Ghrelin.
Oh, ghrelin. Okay.
Yeah. Fructose does not. So when you consume a lot of fructose, a lot of sugar, you're not getting the same level of satiety You're not reducing hunger in the same way as you would if you were eating a real meal. In addition, when you eat all bran or something that that has a fiber, that's moving the food through the intestine faster. So you get the satiety signal at the end of the intestine, and that's a hormone called peptide YY. You get that earlier. So the more sugar you consume, number one, that's the reward center saying, this feels good, I want more. Number two, you're not suppressing hunger. And number three, invariably, it's coming without fiber, so you're not inducing satiety. So you're going to eat more.
So food companies must like that. They must want us to eat more.
They sure do.
That keeps the investors happy. Are there any places where there's more sugar than we would expect there to be, where they've injected sugar?
Well, breakfast. Kellogg's Honey Smacks are 56% sugar. I mean, think of, and the top 17 children's cereals are all over 40% sugar. And if you think about the National School Breakfast Program, that's a bowl of Fruit Loops and a glass of orange juice.
Really?
And Fruit Loops is only number 10 on the list at 41.4% sugar. So when you consume a bowl of Fruit Loops and a glass of orange juice, you have gotten 7 times the amount of sugar that a child should be able to receive. And it's only breakfast.
You must mention juice. I know we have a lot of parents that watch these talks. Should they be feeding their kids juice? Multiple glasses of juice? What instead? Okay. No. Okay.
So they say, but fruit is okay, and fruit is okay.
Okay.
Because fruit does 2 things that fruit juice doesn't. So the first is the amount of sugar in a piece of fruit is actually relatively low. It takes 6 oranges to equal the amount of juice in an 8-ounce glass of orange juice.
Wow.
So you have to squeeze a whole lot of oranges. So you're getting more concentrated, and you're getting it without fiber. So that's the second thing, is because of the fiber does many things in your intestine. The most important thing in terms of juice is what it does is it sets up a gel, a barrier, a secondary barrier on the inside of the intestine that prevents early absorption from the gut into the bloodstream, thereby protecting your liver from the onslaught. And it's all about keeping your liver from, protecting your liver from the overwhelming tsunami that's coming from the sugar that you've consumed. When you consume fruit, you're not getting that tsunami. When you consume fruit juice, you're getting the whole enchilada, the whole thing. In addition, because of that fiber moves through the intestine and again creates short-chain fatty acids, which are anti-inflammatory, and it generates that satiety signal sooner. So you will only eat 1 orange, not 6.
Yeah.
So fruit is self-limiting. Number one, you don't hurt your liver, and number two, you do feed your gut. And that is the definition of healthy. Protect the liver, feed the gut. Any food that does both is healthy. Any food that does neither is poison. Any food that does one or the other but not both is somewhere in the middle. And fruit juice does not protect the liver. And you are getting that big fructose bolus, which is driving the reward center, so you end up consuming more. You would think if you drank a glass of orange juice, you would eat less because you've taken on 120 calories. You actually eat more.
Everyone hear this. Stop. You will probably not be having your fruit juice from a carton, or you should be a little less keen on it. Let's talk about lobbying in Washington. What effect does that have on the World Health Organization and the USDA? And who's lobbying the hardest? Well,
so the people who are lobbying the hardest, of course, the food industry, but they're lobbying through a very specific mechanism. And that mechanism is called the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC. And this is a bill mill that was set up in the 1970s in response to the food industry getting their hands slapped by the Federal Trade Commission in 1972. And what they did was they created this bill mill to basically fashion legislation that they then give to congressmen and senators to introduce on their behalf, and they pay the senators to do it. and they are almost invariably pro-business, whether it's pro-petroleum, pro-food, pro-pharma, pro-agriculture. Bottom line is that is one of the reasons why we are in this boat, is because congressmen and senators are basically bought off. And they are bought off through this mechanism that is very specifically sponsored by the food industry.
Does sugar tax actually reduce consumption?
It does, but it has to be a relatively high tax.
Okay.
So a 10% tax, like what's in Berkeley, it has reduced consumption.
Oh, can you tell us? Because I think not everyone will know what's going on in Berkeley. What's the tax?
So in Berkeley, they introduced a 10% tax on sugar beverages. Some people will just go across the county line to Richmond or to Oakland and get it there. It has worked in Berkeley to some extent because Berkeley is smart.
Berkeley, yeah, it's Berkeley.
But actually, when you model the effects of taxes on consumption, you actually have to raise the tax pretty high to 20%. And
to really change behavior and hurt people's wallet.
That's right. You basically have to make it hurt. In order for a tax to be effective, to reduce effective availability in order to reduce consumption. So, taxation is low-hanging fruit. It's easy to institute. It's easy to collect. It's easy to divert, to an appropriate venue. So politicians like that. There are other sin taxes. We have tobacco taxes.
Sure.
Alcohol taxes, so that concept exists. But I have actually a problem with soda taxes and sugar taxes, because it's really three taxes in one. The first tax is the subsidy. So we're subsidizing sugar. We're subsidizing corn, right? So does it make sense to then tax something that you're subsidizing? I mean, it's kind of,
right. I see.
Effed up in the head. If
right.
Why would you do that? Number one. Number two is there's a second tax. We don't call it a tax. We call it a fee. Okay, it's the fee that you have to pay on your premium to take care of everybody with obesity and metabolic syndrome because of the sugar in the food. Okay? And everyone's paying that, whether they're consuming sugar or not. You're paying $2,750 extra per year in your healthcare insurance because of the effects of obesity and metabolic syndrome on the general public. Whether you're sick or not is irrelevant. You're paying for it already. Kind of unfair to have to pay for it again. Right. And then finally, the tax itself. So for me, the answer is let's get rid of the subsidies. Then sugar will actually rise in price, which will then reduce effective availability, keep it out of processed food, because right now it's just so cheap. That's what the food industry adds on purpose to get you to buy more. And that would reduce consumption without having to institute a soda tax. Yeah. And it would basically make the food a whole lot safer.
I guess big ag might not be so keen on that.
Indeed.
Do you think, I suppose it's too early to tell that the correlation between obesity and COVID might mean that there's more regulation in Washington, or is that unlikely to really happen? Do you think the lobbying is going to be so hard?
I don't see
strong. I mean, not hard, but strong.
Yeah, I don't see it. I mean, especially in this partisan divide, I just. Yeah. So this is a problem, and people need to basically vote on this. This has to become a voting issue, and perhaps COVID-19 will bring it up to the fore to make it a voting issue when people recognize the relationship between processed food and the virus. Maybe that will be an issue that people will vote on. Ultimately, you have to have more votes than dollars in order to change Washington. Politicians lead from behind; they always have. So you have to make this something worth fighting for. Eventually, the food industry sort of doesn't care. They just want to sell. They don't care what they sell. They just want to sell. Right.
Which would make one understand why they're buying, bottled water and other healthy brands, which are becoming more and more popular, whatever it is. Yeah.
Right. So one thing that we've suggested is, why don't we do differential subsidization? Why don't we tax the soda and subsidize the water? Beverage industry makes both. What do they care what they sell as long as they sell?
Right.
Why don't we incentivize the consumption of water and use the money from the tax on the soda to subsidize the water? It becomes a zero-sum game for government, you end up incentivizing. It's both the carrot and the stick. It's the nudge to make people do the right thing.
Right.
And the food industry is not out anything. If anything, it actually helps them.
I see.
But, that's not the way the game works right now because of subsidies.
And that would take a lot of lobbying and therefore a lot of money, because it is very expensive to lobby in Washington. I'm going to ask one or two more questions, and I know we're going to have a ton of others. Is weight gain and obesity is it more of a psychological weakness, or is it a physiological condition?
Oh, it is.
In other words, whose responsibility is it?
There are three reasons to eat: hunger, reward, and stress. And different people have different reasons for eating. Mm-hmm. And some people have more than one. And ultimately, as a pediatric endocrinologist taking care of obese kids, it was my charge to figure out which patient had which problem. So any given patient may have a problem with hunger, and to be honest with you, that's easy to fix. And they might have a problem with reward, which we call sugar addiction, and that's a whole lot harder to fix, but if you know what you're dealing with, you can do it. And then finally, the last one is stress. And it's not stress, it's response to stress. Because if you feel you're stressed, you are stressed, irrespective of what the stress is. And life is stressful, and we're never going to be able to take stress away. So that's the hardest one to deal with. What I can say is when you direct your therapy to the right problem, you can fix the problem. But you can't do it in a one-size-fits-all fashion very easily. Having said that, if we changed the environment, our problems with hunger, our problems with reward, and our problems with stress would all get better. And so I have written a book. It will be out in March.
Ooh, a new book. I'm excited.
New book, brand new book. I'm putting the finishing touches on it right now.
Congratulations.
The provisional title, and hopefully you'll have me back when the book comes out.
Yeah, I'd love to.
The provisional title right now is Food, Pharma, Feds Fiasco.
Ooh, I love it. Great title.
It will be an expose on what has gone wrong in modern medicine, in chronic disease, in nutrition, and in government over the past 50 years.
I think you just said, when is this book coming out?
March 2021.
Oh, great. So we'll be ready for maybe more of an open conversation then on these somewhat taboo topics right now.
Indeed.
I'm going to bring in a friend of mine, Creon Levitt, who comes often to the salons in San Francisco. And I know he's going to have so many questions. I thought it would be like as if we're in my living room, that I would bring him also on the screen. And I can see lots of other questions coming in from folks. So Creon is head of R&D at Planet Labs. Hey, Creon, nice to see you here.
Hey,
Susan. You too. Friends meet. You've definitely been in the same room in my kitchen, where hopefully I'm not cooking too much sugary stuff. I used to cook dessert and make a lot of ice cream. I don't do it anymore.
In San Francisco's been in your kitchen.
Yes, it's not a very distinguishing thing to say. You've been in my kitchen, but I stopped cooking dessert mostly just because I got so lazy. And I noticed that most of my friends were pretty healthy anyway, so why bother? I think we all eat enough food. But anyway, Creon, I know you've got some questions. You're a sciencey guy, and you sort of turned your life around a little bit, I think, with how you ate. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. I started listening to Robert and, many of his colleagues in this kind of low-carb, sugar-reducing community, and I completely changed my physiology and my health around. And now, having just turned 60, I'm far healthier than I ever was, decades previous. So thank you. I have so many questions. I won't have time for them all. I want to share.
Ask a couple.
Okay, so one is this, Robert. There's the whole kind of previous fiasco, arguably, of low fat, but nevertheless, one can look and say the food industry, through both government pressure and public demand, they pivoted and they started making low-fat foods. And whether or not that was the right move for people's health is another matter. But the fact is, the food industry can pivot to provide what people want. Do you think there's a chance they can pivot and provide what people want if they start demanding low-carb and low-sugar foods?
Absolutely. I know they can, and they've told me they can. And I know they can because they all met at Institute for the Future down in Palo Alto 2 years ago to discuss exactly this. And so they're ready with Food 2.0, or 3.0, I should say. They're just driving this bus till the wheels fall off. They already know what they're going to do. They're just, they haven't instituted it because we're still demanding what we want, what placates our taste buds.
What we're addicted to.
And what we're addicted to, and they know it. So I know they can because they've told me they can. The difference is no company will do it on their own because they will not lose money. They can't lose money. They're all, Wall Street. They all have Wall Street quarterly reports. They all have stockholders they have to placate. Several companies have tried. For instance, PepsiCo tried back in the late 2000s. Indra Nooyi, the CEO of PepsiCo, introduced the Good For You line, the hummus and the pretzels and the nuts and the seeds. She lost $349 million in 1 year, and Wall Street called for her head on a silver platter because she, quote, took her eye off the ball, as an example. Okay, she survived that, but that was the end of the Good For You line. Denise Morrison, CEO of Campbell's, came in specifically to turn Campbell's around and make it not a processed canned soup company, but a fresh foods company. She left in 2018 under duress. And there are other examples within the food industry of attempts to try to go it alone, and basically, the public didn't come with them. So this is going to be a problem. I don't see any food company coming along quietly all by themselves. So this has to be a industry-wide change, and it's going to be a long process, a long road.
Okay, so following up. Oh, sorry.
We have to make people want that, and that requires public education, which is what we're doing right now.
Okay, well then following up on that, since we have the public who's kind of maybe slow to react en masse to demand what's healthy for various reasons, and we have the industry, which is this like a coordination problem. No one's going to switch first because they'll get eaten by their competitors if they do. And the Congress is, has regulatory. They've been captured. What about, why are the organizations like the CDC and the WHO and the USDA and all these people who are not elected, but they are career bureaucrats, and presumably they came in mostly for the right reasons to their roles, why don't they take the lead and start turning people around like they did with tobacco and like they did with fat, however misguided that was?
Aren't they lobbied so hard in Washington, those folks?
The USDA is just the political arm of the food industry, and it's a revolving door. If you look at who's been in charge of the USDA, they almost always go right back to the food industry after they're done. Look at Sonny Perdue, who's there right now. Plus, he's under direct orders to reduce USDA's footprint in regulatory, which is why he moved the entire science group from Bethesda to Kansas City, is to basically lose people to the war of attrition, as an example. So, you forget the USDA, they're on the other side.
Big sigh from Creon over there.
Forget them. There are people within the industry who are making attempts to try to do something about it, but it's a half-hearted attempt because everybody basically values their job. So it's going to be a long time coming. Do not expect any help from Washington anytime soon.
What about the health?
Even the agencies,
especially the agencies.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. So then I guess maybe one final one before I kind of free it back to others, because I could talk to you all day. It seems that COVID-19 is a golden opportunity if the data got out to people, if the authorities were honest, which they seem to be somewhat honest. I mean, many different, the Korean CDC, the US CDC, the New York City government, all sorts of people are releasing data which clearly show 90, 95, 97, 98% underlying metabolic comorbidities for people who get hospitalized or get intensive care or die from COVID. Now, this seems like the elephant in the room. And so one wonders what it will take for the information to really get out there and be copped to. And in particular, there's one thing I want to ask about besides the general question of how we take advantage of this crisis to actually get people to change their lifestyles and get agencies to change their recommendations because of the obvious super correlations here. What I want to know is, one pushback that I get from a lot of my otherwise enlightened and educated friends is that you can't say that it's correlated with obesity. That's just shaming fat people.
Right.
And we can't do that. So what is some answers to these things?
So actually, all of the comments you made go to an inherent myth that has to be broken in order to be able to fix this logjam. And that myth was what I wrote my first book about, Fat Chance. A calorie is a calorie. So if you think that the problem is calories, then it's about energy balance. It's about diet and exercise. It's about you eat too much, you exercise too little. Therefore, if you're fat, it's your fault. Therefore, any calorie can be part of a balanced diet. Therefore, don't pick on our calories, go pick on somebody else's calories. If it's about calories, it's under the control of the consumer. And no one wants to tell a consumer it's their fault, because that is a political loser. So no one's mentioning that. What they're saying is, yeah, it's social disparities. It's because blacks are, poorly taken care of to start with. It's because, they're obese because they have sedentary jobs, and it's because, they get more diabetes. Yeah, they do get more diabetes. And the reason they get more diabetes is because they eat twice the amount of sugar that Caucasians and Latinos do. And that's been, the CDC's got those data. So in fact, if we ditch this calories a calorie notion and recognize that metabolic syndrome, these diseases, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, lipid problems, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, are actually driven by the food quality, not the food quantity, by ultra-processed food, high in sugar, low in fiber, then the question is, okay, how do we mitigate these diseases, and how do we provide quality foods to underserved populations? That's the question that has to be asked and answered. And no one is talking about that. Not one person, other than my colleague at Tufts, Dariush Mozaffarian, and also my colleague David Ludwig at Boston Children's. But nobody within government, not one person who's made a statement about these social disparities, not Gretchen Whitmer, not Joe Biden, not anybody who's tried to focus attention on the distinction between the poor Latinos and the poor blacks in, say, Detroit or in New York City, or even in Los Angeles. No one has mentioned food.
Well, it's kind of I don't want to use the conspiracy word, but I'll just say what I think. Maybe nobody wants to blame the victim or blame the consumer or blame the obese person, but actually, no, of course you're not. I'm saying nobody wants to, but in fact, that is what the authorities and the establishment is doing, because they're saying they are implicitly blaming the obese individual because they refuse to place the blame on the food industry, the pharma industry, big ag, all these people.
And the science shows that a calorie is not a calorie.
Right.
So as soon as you dissociate that notion that it's about obesity and talk about metabolic disease instead, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down for the food industry, which is what I've been doing and why I've been successful, because I'm able to voice that distinction because I got the science. This is why the science is so important, and this is why I've written this next book, is to basically make the science immediately transparent for the entire public.
We have a question here
from.
Well,
thank you for answering my questions, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Susan and her wider audience at this point. It's an honor to meet you.
Thank you. Thanks, Crayon. We have a question from Leon. Why does Michigan have the highest death rate, even higher than Louisiana?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. It's a very good question. It may have to do with weather. It's colder in Michigan, and in Louisiana, it's a little warmer, so the take rate's a little bit different. But I agree, they're both obese, they're both high African American, and they definitely do have different mortality rates. It may also have to do, and this is going to sound really weird, but I don't have any data to support it other than demographic, just ecologic data. The worst city was New York. Okay? Now, New York is not that high African American. It is, but I mean, it's got plenty, but it's not as high as, say, Detroit or New Orleans.
Different living conditions, though, and different.
They live up. They don't live out.
Right.
They live in buildings. They live in high rises.
Yeah.
They live in walk-up.
And they're sharing so many things. The elevator.
They're sharing ventilation.
Doesn't matter whether you're wealthy or not in New York. If you're a New Yorker, you always use the subway. You're up close to people, and that's part of the New York lifestyle. Yeah,
that's right. And the bottom line is the ventilation systems in walk-ups go from one apartment to the next. So it's conceivable that COVID-19, is being shared via the ventilation in walk-ups and in high-rises. If you look at Detroit, they have way more high-rises than New Orleans does. New Orleans is a relatively low-lying city, as opposed to Detroit that has lots of projects and lots of high-rise projects. And New York, of course, the highest of all, which I think is one of the reasons why this is such a problem in New York City. It's less of a problem here in California because we tend to be lower rise. In part because of the earthquake situation, it's always been that way, and we also have more land. So, it's not as much that. I would love to see a demographic that determines whether or not the attack rate, not the mortality rate, but the attack rate has to do with whether or not these people live in one-family houses or whether they live in garden apartments or whether they live in high rises.
You haven't seen that. A question from Stephen. Can you talk about the relationship between obesity and plastic?
Sure.
Your thoughts on, why is it not being embraced in the public discourse?
Know it very well. I've done research on it myself. The bottom line is that there are many environmental chemicals, BPA being one of them. It's an estrogen. It's 2 hydroxyl groups, 22 angstroms apart. It's very easy to be an estrogen in this life. Many chemicals are. There are others. There's organochlorines. There's tributyl tin. There are phthalates. There's a whole host of environmental obesogens. Some of them affect fat cell number. Some of them affect insulin resistance. Those that affect fat cell number will increase weight gain. They will increase obesity, but they won't necessarily cause metabolic disease.
So therefore, you're not likely to get type 2 diabetes.
Not from those, right. And there are several obesogens that do that, like, for instance, BPA.
Okay. And
genistein, soy estrogen. Stuff that is in plant-based food. The ones that cause insulin resistance, for instance, phthalates and organochlorines, are more associated with type 2 diabetes. So if you combine all of these, it actually dilutes out the effect. So it's important to know what we're talking about. And it has been embraced in the public discourse, but when you actually look at the data, it probably only accounts for 10 to 15% of the BMI issue, the obesity issue. The food is something that affects everyone and is much more relevant and is much more easily fixed right now. A lot of these obesogens are persistent organic pollutants, or POPs, and they're not leaving the environment anytime soon. We shouldn't add more, but it's not like we're going to be able to clean them up. A perfect example of that is DDT. So DDT is an estrogen. That's why it worked as an insecticide, because it interfered with the life cycle of the insect. It's an estrogen. We stopped using it in 1972 here in America, and you can still measure the metabolite of DDT, called DDE, in the urine of pregnant women now, and it correlates with obesity in their 5-year-olds. So it is a problem. I'm not saying it isn't, but we're not going to be able to clean that up. We can certainly clean up our food supply right now.
Okay, another question from Matt Aaron. Are there any concerns with monk fruit as a sweetener? It's a relatively low glycemic index.
Right. So first of all, glycemic index is a canard.
Ah, okay.
It's the biggest lie on the face of the planet.
All right.
And I'll explain why.
Okay.
Okay, there are two reasons why it's just inappropriate and wrong. Then we'll talk about diet sweeteners in general.
Okay.
So let's talk about glycemic index first. The best way to explain the problem with glycemic index is carrots. So carrots have a high glycemic index. So what is glycemic index? Glycemic index is how high will your blood glucose rise after you eat 50 grams of carbohydrate in a specific food. The carrots have a high glycemic index. If you eat 50 grams of carbohydrate in carrots, your blood glucose will go pretty high. So the dietitians would say, oh, carrots, high glycemic index, don't eat carrots. Garbage. And here's why. It's not about glycemic index, it's about glycemic load. Glycemic load is a different definition. Glycemic load is how many carrots do you have to eat to get the 50 grams? And it turns out for carrots, the answer is you have to eat 700 grams of carrots to get 50 grams of carbohydrate. You have to eat the whole friggin' Grimway truck.
Okay.
You would turn friggin' orange if you ate 50 grams of carbohydrate in carrot. So no one does that. Okay, you can't do that. The fiber is self-limiting. It's a non-issue what its glycemic index is. It is an issue what its glycemic load is. And the fact is all real food is low glycemic load because all real food has fiber. So that's the first problem with glycemic index. The second problem is sugar. It's fructose. So fructose has a low glycemic index of 19. Sugar, sucrose, glucose and fructose together, has a glycemic index of 53. That's also relatively low. So you have people like the people in Australia, like Jenny Brand Miller, who I think is, needs to go back to dietary school, saying, sugar is low glycemic index, therefore sugar is good for you. And they actually put seals of approval, low GI cane, on packages of sugar in Australia, because they make money doing that. They have a foundation that makes money handing out this seal, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Do they have a sugar problem there? Are they very
yeah.
hungry? Okay, I don't know anything about Australia. So.
Enormous. The point is, fructose doesn't get measured in the serum glucose. It gets measured in the serum fructose. And fructose causes this aging reaction 7 times faster than glucose does. And fructose specifically drives liver fat accumulation, having nothing to do with a blood glucose rise. So you're not measuring the thing that makes fructose bad. It's not capturable within the concept of glycemic index. Fructose is bad beyond glycemic index. So yeah, glycemic index is not a bigger lie than low fat, but it's almost as big a lie as low fat.
Maybe not the answer that you expected, Matt. Question from Ryan here. Any thoughts on the microbiome and sugar and research going on?
Sure. So number one, we know that sugar makes a lot of the bad guys in the gut go up, like for instance, firmicutes and archaea. And number two, we have learned, somebody said, what?
There's a lot of other comments going on here about my earrings, etc.
But I might. The other thing we've learned is that sugar, because it changes the metabolic status of intestinal cells, actually causes the tight junctions that normally keep the intestine as a impenetrable barrier. What it does is it loosens those because the metabolic status of those intestinal cells change. And that allows stuff to pass from the intestine into the bloodstream, a process which we call leaky gut. And leaky gut then sets you up for insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome as well. So sugar is a bad guy every which way, and it is something that we should be reducing our consumption of.
Is the desire for sugar genetic? What some people seem to want more sugar than others? So
the taste receptor for sugar, the T1CR, is conserved across all species. Every animal on the planet loves sugar. And every human loves sugar. Having said that, not everyone is a sugar addict.
Right.
So think of it like alcohol. So 40% of Americans are teetotalers. Don't touch the stuff. 40% are social drinkers.
That might have changed over the last 8 weeks, actually, but yes.
Maybe they can pick up a beer, put it down.
Sure,
I'm in that group.
Yeah.
20% have a problem with alcohol, and 10% are hardcore alcoholics.
And is that something to do with the dopamine and how
It does.
it's
It has to do with alcohol metabolism. It has to do with the dopamine. It has to do with prefrontal cortex issues. It has to do with a bunch of things. And we can't yet discern, based on genetics, who's who in that 100% of alcohol use. My expectation is that sugar will end up being something similar to alcohol. There will be hardcore sugar addicts. And then there are people who are social sugar consumers. And then there are people who basically can take it or leave it.
I was starting to ask this earlier when Creon was there, what is the role of health insurance companies around all of this, and also with regards to lobbying in Washington?
Well, insurance has the most to lose, so they should be on board. And it's particularly true. Yeah. It's particularly true since Obamacare. So, prior to Obamacare, insurers wanted you to get sick. It was actually in their best interest for you to get sick. And the reason was because they could raise your rates. It was pay to play and set the rates. It was the casino model. And they were happy for you to get sick. And then they could say, no, we're not going to pay for it. And they'd raise your rates anyway.
Right.
You have a pre-existing condition. Well, Obamacare, for whatever you think about it, and I'm not telling you it's good, bad, or indifferent. People have different views on it. The one thing it did do was it capped insurance profit at 15%. So now they can't make as much money, or nearly the money that they used to be able to make on you getting sick. Now, for the first time, insurers are incentivized for you to be healthy. And the problem is they don't know how. They never
are you friends with insurance companies? Are they knocking on your doors?
I have been in consultation with several insurance companies.
Yeah, I mean,
in an attempt to try to get them to understand the new model and how they should be helping people. And I think they should pay for food. They just shouldn't pay for processed food.
Right.
And there's a way we could actually distinguish those. And I'm actually working with a for-profit digital platform that would tie 4 groups together: the patient, the doctor, the grocery store, and the insurance company, so that everyone wins. Called Foogal, F-O-O-G-A-L.
Foogal.
In an attempt to try to get the insurer to pay for real food, and then you can pay for processed food yourself.
We have a long question here from an Australian, which is covering part of your head. I don't know if you can read it. Okay. Late stage pancreatic cancer. Do you have any recommendations of what she could be doing to complement the chemo?
So pancreatic cancer is a bad one. There's no argument there. It's one of the worst. It's got a very, very low survival rate. It is not good. And I'm sorry for your is it sister?
Sister. Yeah. Sister.
I will say that there are data that show that pancreatic cancers possess an enzyme called transketolase that turns fructose to glucose. So when you give a pancreatic cancer patient sugar, you're actually feeding the cancer, because they can preferentially metabolize that fructose to more glucose. It has been shown in clinical studies. They're small, so it's not across the board yet, and they're being done now at big centers like MD Anderson and Memorial, that a ketogenic diet can actually help starve the cancer and improve short-term survival. The question is whether or not it can improve long-term survival. So if she's drinking Ensure, tell her to stop. Talk with her doctor about the possibility of trying a ketogenic diet to see if it can help mitigate some of the cancer growth.
All right, one more question. What were meals like for you growing up?
My mother was all about Swanson TV dinners, sadly, and Fruit Loops and Rice Krispies and what have you. My mother worked. She had 2 jobs. She worked as a New York City school secretary, and I was sort of left on my own for breakfast each morning.
Yeah.
She also was the agent for my grandparents' brownstone in Manhattan. So in the morning, during the daytime, she was busy. In the evening, she was busy. And so we ate a lot of TV dinners at our house, which was not good. And I recognize that now. At the time, I didn't know any different. And it only took, it was the research that basically made me very clear on, my own weight issues and what I should do about it. And I have slimmed down remarkably.
I can, even since last time I saw you, you look fit as a fiddle over there.
We try.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We have so many questions. We should definitely do this again, as this is a hot topic. And I really wanted to talk about your second book, but maybe we can do that as a second, as another salon, because that book just really struck me, the difference between dopamine and serotonin, and the difference between addiction and feeling sated and happy. So I really love that book, and I can't wait for your next book to come out. So thank you so much for joining. And
it's been always a pleasure. Happy to anytime. You just call on me. I'm here for you.
Oh, thank you so much. Take care.
I can't wait to be back in your kitchen.
Oh, I can't wait either to be back cooking. Yeah. I am not good at cooking for myself. So I feel like I've had a cruddy diet of a lot of raw vegetables recently, a lot of vegetables. But, anyway, okay. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So thank you everyone for joining. We could have been asking questions. I could have carried on and asked questions forever, but hopefully we can have Robert on again sometime very soon. Tomorrow, Zach Williams and I have our weekly On the Mind salon, and we are going to talk to the executive director of the Kinsey Institute. And the topic is sex during COVID, and some of the research that they have come across, or that they've been working on at the Kinsey Institute at Indiana University. So please tune in, same time tomorrow. And if you don't catch us live, or you don't have time to, and you can't, at 1 p.m. on Thursday Pacific time, you can follow us on YouTube. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Je demande comment, mais personne n'a répondu. Personne ne m'a entendu. Et je demande pourquoi. Je demande comment. C'est l'ami